Good evening, gentlemen. You talked earlier about the idea that there is policy up here, and below that there is culture, and that the policy can change, but the cultural influences are a lot more deeply rooted. And I was wondering if you might address something that I think is actually even more on the point, because what really interests me in this subject is the individual human psychology of this effect that we're seeing. When you were speaking a few moments ago and answering one of the questions, you were describing the qualities of anti-Semitism, which sounded to me verbatim what the qualities of anti-Americanism were when you began your speech earlier on. Mm-hmm. That's telling me that anti-American is the new anti-Semitism. And I believe that it's caused by the same things that caused anti-Semitism in the 20s and 30s. I think it's driven by envy, and I think it's driven by guilt. And I think that if you look at what you said about the response to the United States after 9/11, that there was tremendous support for our country after we'd been attacked, that support evaporated not at the beginning of the Iraq War, but that support evaporated the moment we fought back. The moment we no longer were willing to take a position of victims, no longer were willing to be helpless and powerless, that support just disappeared. Mr. Wilson, you were saying earlier, you were talking about that survey, what Americans thought versus what Europeans thought, and it struck me listening to that list, that a list of American values are optimistic values, they're positive values, and sir, your reference to the football game, the soccer game, is telling me that the European Union is essentially a negative space created around the fact that the only thing Europeans can agree on and value is that they're not Americans. So this is my question. This is my question. I am very curious to know what you gentlemen think about the individual on the street and the cognitive dissonance that they must experience on a daily basis. They call us incredibly stupid. I took a look at the 2007 citations for scientific achievements. Number 2 was Britain with 7 million. Number 1 was the United States with 38 million scientific citations. Daily, these people must be confronted with the falsity of what they believe. And when you look at what the 9/11 truthers have to believe in order to jump through that little hoop, I think the fundamental basis is most of these people are just plain nuts.
Let me just, since this is the last, I believe, question, let me just point out how old this is. In the 18th century, Abbé Raynal said that America, because of its degenerate status, can produce no poet or no mathematician. And Gobineau, who was the great architect of European anti-Semitism, said that his criticism of the United States was there, they will allow the Aryans to degenerate. So this has been going on for a long time.
Well, yeah, just plain nuts is a way to speak bluntly about what people in our business might call ideology. And these ideologies of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, which may have something substantive to do with each other, and I tried to elaborate that on that earlier, could be talked about on a much more straightforward level as two modes of stereotypical thinking, and stereotypical thinking all share certain structures, and they're impervious to empirical evidence. And that's the point that you're making. The
point I'm trying to make, sir, is that if anti-Americanism is fundamentally driven by envy and guilt, which I think there's some evidence for, then the question becomes who's really responsible for the phenomenon. And if it is not the Americans who are primarily responsible for the phenomenon, then talking about altering our policies is not a terribly judicious way to look at the solution to the problem.
I think that's something I've agreed with, that it's not a matter of American policies, but it's about various structures in European culture, in European psychology, in European traditions.
Andy, you want to say something?
No, I'll pass. No one can top nuts. I mean, General McAuliffe, of course, did it so beautifully in Bastogne when he replied when surrounded by the Germans and they asked him to surrender. He just mailed back, he said, nuts. So.
I'll respond. I'll say one thing, though, that it's interesting to call the new anti-Semitism anti-Americanism, but we have to remember the old anti-Semitism is still very much with us. hasn't disappeared.
Sir, General McCall, actually, he didn't just say nuts. What his actual quote, his actual quote was, "Are they effing nuts?"
Exactly.
Very good.